case of the Long Island serial killer is still unsolved. Follow us, Billy Jensen and Alexis Linkletter, as we investigate the untold story of the Long Island serial killer. 11 victims, 10 years, and countless theories.
It was just how many bodies were being found in one area. I was shocked.
And for us, this case is personal. You can follow our investigation in our all-new special, Unraveled, The Long Island Serial Killer, streaming now on Discovery+.
10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
You have entered Untold Radio AM. And now broadcasting from a secret location, your hosts, Joel Sturgis and Doug Hychak.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second edition of Untold Radio. I am your fill-in host tonight, Michael O'Neill. If you know Joel Sturgis, our wonderful normal co-host, he unfortunately had a family emergency that he had to take care of tonight. So, as his co-host for After Hours AM, I am filling in. And with me, as always, or should be always anyway, is the great Mr. Doug Hychak. Good evening, Doug. How are you?
Good. How are you, Mike?
Nervous? A little off-put, maybe?
Well, what are you nervous about?
About the show tonight, because this is going to be a great, really, really great show tonight.
Yeah, we do have a great guest.
We do. So coming up in under 30 minutes now, so during the half-hour commercial break, we will be bringing in Dr. Stephen HSU, who is one of the leading in the world, geneticists. Did I say that right? I mean, is that correct?
Yeah.
Genome.
He's a genomic expert, but he's got a lot of other credentials too.
None of which I know probably even how to pronounce.
Theoretical physicist is one of them.
I can't say that. Theoretical physicist
Yeah.
studies, obviously theoretical physics, cosmology too. Bring it up here. So particle physics, quark matter, black holes, quantum information, quantum gravity, quantum foundations, all these things that are about 17,000 levels above my current state of intelligence.
Probably above almost everybody on the planet.
Right. So I have had very little time to prepare. But I still think it's going to be a great show, great guest, and you're going to get a ton of information. That's for sure. I mean, I fully plan on having my mind blown tonight.
I think you will. Literally.
Let's hope not literally, because I don't want this. I want to continue my career. I don't want my mind to be like in the walls.
So, did you get out and enjoy this gorgeous day today?
No, I did not. The enjoyment came from the breeze coming through the window as I watched documentaries and read articles and researched as much as I could for this.
Well,
so no.
Just to inform you, we had one of our 6 normal, 6 days a year. We used one up to.
Yep.
It was beautiful.
Well, I got the other 5.
72 and sunny.
That's wonderful. I think Friday I was told here in Minnesota that it's supposed to be 80s on Friday.
Yeah, it will.
So I do have some more opportunities to get out there and enjoy it. In fact, you and I need to go UFO searching, watching.
Yeah, we can do that this weekend.
That's right.
We'll do it this weekend.
right off your back porch, apparently.
Yeah. 10 feet from the sliding door.
The only thing... No, you know what? I'm not going to say that. So, before we bring in Dr. Stephen HSU, there are a few things that are going on right now, Doug, that I would like to converse with you about.
Go right ahead.
The first thing is there's a theory out there now that from the Smithsonian Magazine saying that crows possess like form consciousness. And to me, like, that's not like mind-blowing news. Like, duh, of course they do. So I guess my question is, why is this suddenly news?
That's kind of a lot of scientific news that I get. I kind of feel like, really? Somebody wasted who knows how many millions on this? Because although it's good information, it didn't strike me as new either. I mean, any animal that can rear their young, have a mate for life. Apparently, they have the intelligence almost of a chimpanzee level, if not beyond. You kind of wonder, why the study, and the study was really weird. They had them look at weird images of like hominids on light bulbs, and I'm thinking, oh, who the heck dreamed this up? It was really a weird study. But don't you agree, Michael, that all animals I'm not talking about wood ticks, not even talking about maybe mosquitoes, but beyond that, let's say spiders and up have some form of consciousness. I fully agree. I think they all have the ability to learn, to adapt, to think for themselves, to make decisions that I guess that help them interact with their environment. I mean, we see it in all kinds of different animals, and even not just crows. That's why I guess that's what threw me off the most is why are you just talking about crows? I know everybody hates crows. Like, they're the bane of everybody's existence, apparently. But I guess then it's if they crap on your car, it's a decision that they made. Like, they intentionally was like, I'm going to get that guy. I am so ruining that guy's day. And I could see that. Well, instead of it just being purely instinctual. I mean, I'll go as far as to say even fish. I mean, obviously, I could tell you fish stories where they obviously show emotion, intelligence. I was up in the Arctic one time and brought a 30-pound lake trout on board on a gurney that we had caught with a barbless hook, so we didn't hurt it. It laid on that gurney, and it looked around the boat, and then it locked eyes with me. This is a fish.
You got stared down by a trout?
But it's 100 years old, Michael. It was 100 years old. And so,
holy crap.
But it looked at me with such amazing intelligence. And then I thought, okay, at the time I was 30, this fish is no doubt at least 100 years old. And I thought, you may have wisdom I don't even have. So, studies like the crow thing and about whether they have consciousness, I think we should be worried about more what can they see, how well can they hear, maybe give them intelligence tests. But to say crows possess consciousness like it's some, you know what I mean, big new discovery just kind of makes me just go, nah, not interested.
Yeah. I mean, they have tons of experiments out there, videos. They even have ravens, which are cousins of crows or however they're messed up. It's just another black bird that nobody likes. And they have given them like mazes and stuff and problems to see if they can figure out how to solve them. And they do.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, squirrels, mice.
People have done that forever. People have been taming crows since the dawn of man. they're one animal you can tame as an adult because they're so intelligent.
So, I mean, to see that, and I know sometimes, you bring up, people bring up articles from 2016 or whatever, so these breakthroughs, or however you want to call them, are old by the time they're told. But this was just written 5 days ago.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of
7 days ago. Let me rephrase. September 30th. So, I mean,
Mike, okay, I went to my garage thing today, and there's a big spider nest up by the light. And the reason it's by the light is because the spider figured out that the light attracts moths and flying insects, and so it built this really cool trap. Of course, I don't like it because there's spider poop along my step and kind of creeps you out when you walk under it. But come on.
Yeah.
To study whether an animal has consciousness seems kind of trite.
I 100% agree. And speaking of consciousness, with people, humans, consciously seeing what they think are UFOs. switching topics. Because there's another report that was just put out 5 days ago, that the UFO sightings because of COVID are rising, but that the article obviously talks about that it's really greatly exaggerated, that's not actually the truth. Do you agree with that?
Well, first off, if you notice where the article was published, astronomy.com, you already know that they're completely doing everything they can do to debunk UFOs. So right away, my mind's going, fake news, fake news. So I read it, and I go, once again, it's a great article, but it pretty much just debunks UFOs.
Not so much, because it does say in it. They talked to a guy from MUFON, Hudgens. What a great name. They talked to a guy from MUFON, and he says, so far from January to September of this year, there's been 3,800 reported cases, right, which is roughly a 20% increase compared to 2019. Now, so in a project that I was doing just very recently, I mean, up 10 days ago, that it actually brought me to do research on UFO sightings and how many were in like the number one states, where people are seeing UFOs. And the one thing, and it wasn't MUFON, it was another site, and it was a site where everyday people could log on and put in their own reports of them seeing something, what city they were, what they saw. And one of the things that I noticed a ton in what I did, and I think that this might be the reason for it, and I think the reason why they're saying that it's greatly exaggerated is because people are mistaking and misidentifying natural things. And I saw a crap load from many, many, many different states, probably at least 10, 15 states that I looked at. So probably all of them, but that people were greatly misidentifying the Starlight satellites that Elon Musk put out to help Wi-Fi signal. But apparently they're in low orbit, and at dusk or dawn, the sun reflects off of them, and it looks like a fleet of UFOs are being seen. So, I mean, do you think that a lot of these sightings could be just misidentifying?
Well, first off, sightings like that, little pinpoints of light and so on, are pretty much just noise. It's just noise that messes up everything. The type of sightings that I'm interested in is when you see somebody say, well, okay, from wingtip to wingtip was a foot wide at arm's length. Now, that's a sighting that I'm going to pay attention to. But the press keeps giving attention to the bugs and the cotton balls and the stars, Venus and satellites and things like that. But to me, I don't even consider those UFO sightings in my book.
Well, I know you don't, but they still are reported as such.
Right. But I think they should have a better filter at MUFON and some of the other reporting sites to just filter out things like that. I want to hear about things that come over and light up the neighborhood. Things that cannot be a bug.
I mean, this article talked about in 2008 in Stephenville, Texas, where there were dozens of reliable witnesses that says they claimed to see a UFO as big as a Walmart.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing sighting. Those are the types of things that need to be brought forward. And once again, instead of astronomy.com talking about bugs and cotton and stars and satellites, they should have been talking about the Stephenville sighting, where literally the entire town saw this. People were claiming all over the town of being abducted and actually being treated quite harshly. I mean, that's kind of more interesting when you have hundreds of people that have seen something that's huge. You know what I mean?
Well, wait. So they obviously didn't go into a lot of detail, but I had never heard of the Stephenville, Texas incident until I read this.
I'm very familiar with it.
So you're saying that like tons of people in the entire town claim to have gotten abducted?
Correct. Yep. And they did not need hypnosis to remember it.
I wonder what Stephenville did to piss off aliens.
I mean, if you think about it, once again, you have to think kind of logically. I mean, they discovered 24 planets this week that are probably have better conditions for life than Earth. And so...
Well, that's not hard considering the status of Earth at the present moment.
But if you think about it, we may be getting visited by all sorts of different, planets. And this particular, whoever came here said, hey, let's start grabbing people. And they literally, this was kind of wild, but some of the people describe in vivid details the inside of the ship. They talk about being plopped on autopsy-type tables. I mean, it was scary for them. Can you believe them? But there's such there's such backup for each person's story that you almost have to.
So I've asked you this question before, and I'm going to ask you again because I don't think, because I asked you and Chuck Zukowski at the same time, and I think I asked Chuck first, and I don't think we got to you. Do you think that we're beyond the point where we can ask the question, are we alone in the universe? I mean, do you think that is just a fact that everybody should accept, and now it comes to like, where are they? Why are they doing what they're doing? Blah, 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 blah. But I mean, do you think we're beyond just we're not alone?
I think it would be. I think if you were at a party and you asked every single person at the party, are we beyond that? I would probably say the consensus would be every single person at the party would think, yes, we are not alone. Not everybody would be in agreement that we've been visited. That's always the big one, because they keep saying, well, the distances are too far. But that's too far with our technology. We maybe can't even fathom the types of technology that they're using to get here. Time travel, who knows? We know nothing. But I think everybody pretty much believes there's life out there.
I mean, we have, and I don't know if we'll get to this with our guest here tonight, because we have 1,000 other things to talk about. But while I was doing my readings today, I came across the theory of the wormhole. I mean, you would think that a race of beings that had that type of technology would be able to not only like detect them, but use them.
Correct. Yeah. Why wouldn't they? We don't know much, but there's so many different ways that they could get here. We don't know how long these civilizations have had craft. 1,000,000 years, 10,000 years. Great. What are we going to have in 1,000 years from now? I couldn't even fathom. We don't know what we don't know.
That is true. I mean, and we're learning everything like every day. We're learning new stuff. In fact, some of the stuff that I found out today, I still don't understand. as I was telling you off, before the show. And I don't think I ever will. But I understand like the basic gist of it. And I'm probably not supposed to. That's not my job here to understand what that is. That's Stephen HSU's job.
I have a feeling Stephen is so good. You're going to get done with this radio show, and you're going to have an understanding of genomics, probably a better understanding of even artificial intelligence.
Well, I already know artificial intelligence. Like I said, it's not a matter of can we use it or anything like that, or when it's going to be in full use. It is going to be, to me, the most important part is when is it going to come to the conclusion that humans need to be extinct in order to save everybody else.
It's definitely an argument against it.
It is. And, I guess my other question is, and I'm sure everybody else asked this as well, do we really need it? I mean, yeah, it makes our lives so much easier, but we've got along great without it. So, I mean, do we really need AI?
Well, we do if we want to go to other planets.
Do we want to go to other planets, Doug? Do we want to?
I do. You can
which other planet
going?
Which other planets do you want to go to?
God, anywhere. It would be awesome to go anywhere. Even the moon would be fine.
So I do believe at some point in time we will have some sort of environmental dome or something on the moon where there's going to be 20,000 people living on there. But other planets, I mean, obviously people are talking about Mars and especially Venus. And Venus is our next one because they have actually found phosphate. Yeah, phosphine and
yes.
Phosphine, but that's phosphate and hydrogen.
Yes, correct.
Which makes phosphine. I read, Doug.
Jeez. I'm impressed.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a high school diploma and everything. It's great. But what do you think that actually signifies?
It signifies a bunch of scientists arguing as to whether that phosphine gas is really in the data. Because if it is, it's a very, very good chance there's some type of life, whether it's, microbial or small life. Certainly one of the building blocks of life. Now, if they would have collected a whole bunch of methane, that might have
not so
that.
much.
But there's guys that have been, for instance, there was somebody that found microbes on a meteorite they found in Antarctica. And if you look at the skeleton, the little skeletal remains of these microbes on this meteorite, yeah, you could argue it, but to me it doesn't look like it just happened by happenstance. It looks like a chunk of fossilized bacteria. So once again, I don't get too excited about this because it's like I've already seen UFOs up close. I've seen things, so I know they're real. So all this news is kind of like, okay, well, I'm glad they're getting there, knock on my door when you get a little farther. Or do you want to come over to my house?
You're really in 2024 right now, Doug.
Well,
you are.
I've been either lucky, who knows? I don't know. But I have had enough sightings. I mean, my first sighting happened in the 70s, and I actually got out of my car, walked under it, because it was parked right above the intersection. I mean, that's kind of specific. It's not like, some swamp gas. And then I, of course, realized what I was looking at was very real because I was also skeptical. Drove away at high speed the moment I realized this was a real UFO, and it was kind of bricks and mortar. And I got the heck out of there. And then I watched it go across the road over the pet hospital.
So beyond the moon, where do you think we are going to be able to get to first, Mars or Venus?
Oh, definitely Mars. Venus is a long ways away. Yeah, that's a long ways. if you look, and I'm not that big on astronomy. I've never been that terribly interested in it beyond making the paper mache models in school, But Venus is a long ways away. I mean, I don't know how many years it took a probe to get there, but it was beyond 5 years.
So there is, I'm trying to remember what his name was. But supposedly back in I believe it was Eisenhower. It was either Eisenhower or Johnson. But they had what they considered to be somebody who lived inside, not on top, but inside Venus. And they said like he spoke pretty much every language. He had an IQ of like 1200 or something like that. And I can't.
Are you thinking of Adamski?
No.
No.
It was a really weird movie that I'm trying to remember, and I really want. There it is, The Visitor. The Visitor in 1979 was a movie, I believe, about it. Dang it, I cannot remember what his name was.
Talking about not Billy Meyer. Billy Meyer in Switzerland. No. Nope. I've never heard of this, and probably wouldn't be too interested because it sounds pretty crazy.
Well, I mean, yes, but apparently, like, there are Pentagon papers or whatever that say this guy did exist. Like, there's photos of him with like the president at the time, and oh my God, I cannot remember his name.
I think you imagined all this, Michael.
I did not. I tell you, I did not.
Okay.
Valiant Thor. That's his name. I knew
I've
like
never heard of this guy.
There was a T in there. I knew it started with a T. And I was like, Thor? I'm like, no, it wasn't Thor, but it is Thor. Valiant Thor. No, apparently he was working, he was from Venus, and he was working with the Pentagon on a whole bunch of things. And yeah, he like spoke every single language, and I would look into him, see what you say, because I would really like your opinion on whether you think he was real or not. But he said that he lived inside Venus. That's where
just inside. Just inside.
Like, well, I'm sure I'm probably paraphrasing, but he lived obviously underground. Nobody lived on the surface. They all lived in the interior. Think of it like Zion from the Matrix.
Oh.
They lived close to the planet core. That sort of thing. Do you think it's possible?
No.
Oh, well, still look it up.
I'll look it up.
Maybe
just
when you see
5 minutes of my life.
I'm going to waste a hell of a lot more than that in the coming days, weeks, and years. So just get used to it. And you don't know. He definitely could be from Venus. This guy, like I said, there's papers and evidence the fact that this guy existed.
Okay, but that doesn't mean he was from Venus.
Very true. But if I'm sure they tested him, and if he literally had an IQ of 1200 and spoke every single language, you would probably start to believe him a little bit that maybe he's not from around here.
Can you even get an IQ that high?
Apparently he can.
Yeah.
I know I'm close, but not quite there yet.
Yep. pushing past a hundo.
I never said how close I was. So, you're probably a little bit more closer than I am. So
I recently took an IQ test. I'm not going to tell you what it was.
That's either to save me some sort of self-esteem, or you're not very proud,
or I'm embarrassed,
or you're embarrassed.
One of the two.
Which is it?
I'm not telling.
Really quick.
Okay. You know, no.
That's fine. I'm all right with that.
I took it because I was curious.
Fair enough. Was it an official IQ test, or was it something you saw
I tested myself on a timer, so... No, it was not. I didn't go somewhere to be tested. Wasn't a mental...
Well, no, I was going to say, did you go on like social media and find out, what He-Man character you are?
No.
No? Oh, no. Okay. I would think that... I don't know, what He-Man character do you think would be? Skeletor?
I don't have any idea. I don't watch He-Man.
Nor should you. It's terrible.
We're almost to the hour here.
So we are actually going to go to break. And when we come back, Dr. Stephen HSU is going to be with us. And I'm going to thankfully take a back seat. And I'm going to just turn everything over to you.
No, you're not.
You're going to do great, Doug. I mean, I'm still going to be here. But a little few and far between. So we'll be back here in a couple minutes. See you on the other side.
Hi, Tom Bodette. If you can hear me, then you have an internet connection, which means you can do cool things online, like listen to streaming radio, obviously, or watch a video of a monkey washing a cat. Let your freak flag fly. Or you can book a room at a great price at Motel6.com. Isn't the internet wonderful? Everything you want right at your fingertips, and whoa, did not need to see that. I'm Tom Bodette for Motel 6, and we'll leave the light on for you.
Unexpected reactions to smart financial decisions brought to you by feedthepig.org.
Well, I finally did it. My student loan is totally paid off.
I can't believe it.
I can't believe it either. I paid more than the minimum each month, and soon enough, it was gone.
So you're just giving up?
Giving up on what?
The life of luxury. Egyptian cotton, caviar Thursdays, designer everything.
What are you talking about?
Our plan. What happened to winning the lottery and mastering the art of the perfect mimosa? Hosting galas, wearing enough jewelry to require a bodyguard, vacationing in the French Riviera, and then buying it.
I just thought maybe it was time to prepare for my future. You know, set some financial goals, make some smart investments, open a 401k.
Financial goals? Investments? A 401k? You are horrifying right now. Listen, if winning the lottery were easy, everyone would do it.
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs and the Ad Council.
Northern Tool and Equipment.
So me and the boys head out to tailgate today and find some other fans in our spot.
Well, it happens.
Cheering for the wrong team.
Oh, this is war.
Even worse, they've got this couch set up and everything.
A couch?
Yeah, it's sectional.
All right, first thing, don't ever use the word sectional again.
Done.
Second, I want you to grab a 4,700-pound tow chain with J-hook and grab hammer. Throw that on the back of your truck.
Got it.
Now you're going to Hail Mary the J-hook over the end of that couch. Time to find a better spot for your new friends.
That should do it.
There's no problem a little horsepower can't solve. Northern Tool and Equipment.
Taking a family of 5 to the amusement park can cost a small fortune.
Oh, yeah. So to save some money, we thought, hey, let's bring the amusement park to us. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. Step right up, young man. Are you ready to ride the wacky waterfall?
That's just the bathtub with the shower head running.
Nope, it's the wacky waterfall.
It's the shower, Dad.
Waterfall.
Wacky.
There's an easier way to save. To get a free rate quote, go to geico.com. Then buy online, over the phone, or at your local Geico office.
Green light. Hey, girl. School zone. I'm getting hungry. Car changing lanes. You want to meet me for pizza? Stop sign. Intersection clear. Yeah, street. Pizza sounds good. Ballin Street? Girlin Street!
It's hard to concentrate on two things at once, like texting and driving. Stop the text, stop the wrecks. How will you stop texting and driving? Tell us at stoptextstoprex.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
And we are back. Hope you're all still with us. I'm your host, Michael O'Neill. With me, as always, is the co-host, Mr. Doug Hychek. And also joining us, so happy to introduce him, Dr. Stephen HSU, who has so many accolades, I don't even know where to begin. So, Steve, I'm just going to ask you to kind of tell people about your career and everything that you are kind of involved in.
Wow, it could take a little while, but let me just start by saying I'm a theoretical physicist. I'm a professor at Michigan State University, but I have a pretty long background with technology startups in Silicon Valley. And my first startup was actually in information security, encryption-related things, with one of our early investors actually was the CIA venture fund. About 10 years ago, I started getting interested in genomics because the cost to genotype or sequence DNA was falling at a super exponential rate. And so I predicted about 10 years ago that we would eventually get to the point where we could answer a bunch of really fundamental questions about human evolution, the decoding of our DNA, and actually one of the other things maybe I'll mention is the application to solving crimes, forensic DNA. And so I've recently founded two different startups, one called Genomic Prediction and the other called Artificial, one of which is involved in helping parents going through IVF select the right embryo to implant if they have multiple embryos. And Artificial solves crimes using crime scene DNA, using forensics.
What is new kind of in the world of genomic DNA? I mean, have there been any breakthroughs as of late?
Oh, there have been huge breakthroughs. The general trend is that the molecular technologies are getting more and more powerful. One aspect of that is that it's very inexpensive now to read out someone's DNA. So if I can just get even a single cell from your body, I can amplify the DNA and sequence it, and I can get all 3 billion base pairs. So each of us is built from a little code which includes 3 billion amino acid pairs, base pairs, that are in each cell of our body. And that's what you start as. You start as a single cell, and then that cell just keeps dividing. And so in every cell of your body, there's the same DNA. And the information that's in each of those cells in the form of DNA is the same. And it's now very inexpensive to read out that DNA. I can read out all 3 billion base pairs for under $1,000, and I can get an inexpensive sense of your DNA for $30 or $50, which is what, say, 23andMe or Ancestry.com does. That involves reading out about 1 million locations, the million most informative, roughly speaking, locations out of the 3 billion. So because it's so cheap to get access to that data, you can apply what are called machine learning or AI techniques to that data. So we routinely analyze hundreds of thousands of genotypes from hundreds of thousands of individuals. And we use what you might call machine learning or AI algorithms to decode the DNA to figure out, okay, based on this person's DNA, can I predict what will their eye color be? How tall are they? Are they likely or more or less likely to have a heart attack or breast cancer? These are all things that we've made tremendous progress on just in the last few years. And the final thing, which I don't actually personally work on, but your audience probably has heard about it, is gene editing. So we've also been, we, meaning scientists, have been developing very, very effective, inexpensive methods for editing DNA. And so, in 10 or 20 years, that is going to become a real issue where parents are going to decide whether they want their children or their embryos gene edited, so custom changes to their DNA. But that isn't currently reality.
So right now, Stephen, how many creatures are walking the earth that have been, where CRISPR has been used and their genes have been edited?
Many. I mean, I would say I've lost count, but the most common things that people look at are typically mouse models. So there are many, many gene-edited mouse and rat lines that are used in laboratory research. We actually established the first gene editing lab here at MSU a few years ago. But it's used all over the place. It's used in plant breeding, research in animal models for human illnesses. There are even in cases where CRISPR has been injected into humans, adult humans, to edit the DNA in some of the cells in their body.
So you mentioned plants, that you would be able to even splice the DNA from plants. Is there any way that we might be able to, and maybe this is a dumb question, but we would be able to create or alter a type of plant to help with climate change, to help bring in, they can absorb more CO2 and put out even more oxygen?
Yes. I mean, in principle, yes, all these things are, ideas that people are working on. So just even increasing the efficiency with which plants can grow, for example, can reduce our carbon footprint on the planet. You can imagine algae that somehow manages to produce biofuels that we can use in place of petroleum products. So, genetic engineering, it has so many applications. Plant science is not really my area of expertise. I mostly work on humans. But, one thing I think people should take away maybe from this discussion is that there's really no limit to where science and technology can take us. And every country has to really invest in getting its best minds access to the kinds of educations and technology necessary to push back the frontier. Everybody benefits from that.
One more thing on plants, Stephen. Everybody talks about, and you see all the packaging, it's GMO free, where GMO is this really bad thing. Certainly got a lot of bad press. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, these are plants that have gone through CRISPR, basically, or no?
No. GMO refers to much older technologies for genetic modification, and the U.S. is actually not. It doesn't have tight regulatory controls over the use of GMO plants, and it's Europe and some other countries that do, some other parts of the world that do. And most scientists that I know, and this is not my area of expertise again, most scientists that I know do not believe that GMOs are dangerous. And, you've been, as an American, you've been eating GMO food, big chunk of your life, probably with no negative consequences. So that's one of those areas where I believe the consensus among all the scientists who study this is that this is all very safe. It's just the general public is very scared of it. It's a little bit like nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is nowhere near as dangerous as people think it is, and it's actually a very green form of energy. But because of somewhat irrational fears, the technology has been limited in application.
Well, what would the name be then for a corn plant that was modified and made better through CRISPR? Is there a name?
Well, I think it might also be called GMO.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what the rules are for the classification, but GMO, the term, has been around since well before CRISPR was discovered as a technology. So there were other more primitive ways to modify genes in plants.
Yeah, there was a line in the documentary Human Nature where they said years ago they called them geneticists farmers.
Yep, I remember
They had a real kick out of that. Yeah, that was amazing. Because they've been breeding plants and doing things and combining, picking the best seeds and basically doing genetic modification for what, hundreds of years.
Oh, no, thousands of years. I mean, if you look any modern food that you eat, whether it's corn or an orange or whatever it is, that has been bred by humans for long periods of time to make it into what it is today. And oftentimes the progenitor version of that species is totally unrecognizable by modern standards. So humans have been engaging in selective breeding, first just using fairly basic techniques, but then in recent years, more and more advanced techniques. It's been going on forever, and it's never stopped.
So moving back to people, you mentioned AI, and I know that AI is very controversial with a lot of people. Do you think you could have gotten as far, or you have gotten as far as you have without it?
Well, so AI is a broad catch term, and I think the more accurate term is machine learning. So it's basically using computer programs to learn from data. And what I was emphasizing earlier is that one of the things driving the big advance in genomics is just the availability of data. So the ability to read out the blueprint, if you like, of a million different people, and then try to figure out which little pieces of DNA are affecting your eye color or affecting whether you're going to go bald when you're older. And teasing out those results would just have been impossible without very powerful computing technology.
So would you say then that combining AI and genomics, they really complement each other, and will they, and kind of working the two together, do you think that it would change a lot of things?
So machine learning is definitely just an absolutely essential tool for genomics to figure out really, before you make any edits or do anything to somebody's DNA, you better figure out what the consequences are. And the only way you can figure out the consequences is by seeing lots of examples of different people, each of whom have slightly different DNA, and then each of them is individually different from each other. And the complexity of 3 billion base pairs and all the different ways that two people can differ from each other, it's really too much for the human brain. So you really need a computer to actually figure out how it all works. To give you an example, my lab, we were the first to produce an accurate predictor of human height from DNA alone. If you take two identical twins, so those are two humans that have exactly the same DNA, and if they're adopted into different families as babies, so maybe one is raised in North Carolina by a coal miner or something, and one is raised in California by a doctor, as long as they both have decent childhoods, decent nutrition, they'll end up being within half an inch, maybe an inch at most, different in height. So height is very heritable. Once someone has a good environment, it's mainly up to the DNA to determine how tall they're going to grow.
Does that database continue to grow, Stephen?
Yes, we are constantly getting more and more data and improving our predictors. So we can now predict someone's height. If you just give me their DNA and nothing else, you don't tell me anything else about them, as long as they grew up in a decent place where they had good food, they say they grew up in the United States, I can predict their height with accuracy of roughly an inch.
That's crazy. How many different DNA samples from people do you guys have now in your GenBank?
Well, there are various what are called biobanks, which are DNA repositories all around the world. And, at Michigan State, I would say at our supercomputing center, we probably have access to, I think, on the order of a little bit less than 1 million genomes, but not that much less than 1 million genomes that we, conduct analysis on. And we collaborate. For example, we collaborate with the Taiwan Biobank and other countries, the UK Biobank. And so, all aspects of machine learning and AI, they're very data-driven. You need the data, and you also need the clever algorithms. And it's the two together that make for progress.
Do companies like 23andMe, these commercialized DNA ancestry companies, do they share the DNA anonymously? I mean, is there a name link to it? Or does that information just private?
in almost all research studies, the data is anonymized, so that I might be working with somebody's DNA, but I don't know who it is. And I might know some certain things about them, like this person had coronary artery disease, or this person had diabetes, this person is 6'4" and weighs 240 pounds. They're various. This type of information is called the phenotype of the individual. The genotype is the DNA sequence, and the phenotype is the physical characteristics of the person or the medical history. And that's the kind of data that we're analyzing. Generally, we don't know who the person is. Now, having said that, if I really wanted to identify somebody from their DNA, I could, because there are big databases now and there are very good genealogical records. So I can actually run a search and do some analysis on someone. And typically in the United States, if I just have the DNA, and this goes to crime and forensic applications, I can usually identify a cousin, maybe a second cousin, of the person right away, just from the DNA. And then if the police really want to solve the crime, they just need to go and talk to that person who's identified in the database, who's the cousin of the person, they say the killer, and just say, hey, do you have a cousin who lives in Fort Worth, Texas? Because we really like to talk to him. And, we just, maybe we'll get to this later if you want, or I can talk about it now. This company, Othram, that I co-founded, just solved an unbelievable cold case from 46 years ago in Fort Worth, Texas, involving the kidnapping and murder of a young high school girl.
So, absolutely. Let's hear about that now.
Yeah.
Sure. So 46 years ago, 1974, this young woman, Carla Walker, I believe is her name, in a car with her boyfriend. She's a 17-year-old cheerleader. Her boyfriend is a high school quarterback, and they're both from Fort Worth, Texas. And they've just come from a Valentine's dance in February, and they're in his car, parked in, parking lot of a bowling alley where they stopped to get some food after the dance. And they're making out in the car, and suddenly somebody rips open the passenger side door with a gun and points it at the boyfriend and says, I'm going to kill you. And then he pulls the trigger, but the gun jams. And so the guy, who turns out to be a very big guy, beats down the quarterback, knocks him unconscious with the pistol, and kidnaps the girl. And the quarterback survives. He wakes up and he calls the police, and there's a 3-day manhunt. Everybody's going crazy in that town, trying to find this girl, who had a lot of friends, was very popular. And 3 days later, they discover the body. She's been raped. She's been tortured. And in fact, very strangely, like almost from a David Lynch movie, she had been injected with morphine during her captivity. They find the body. Unfortunately for the quarterback, he's one of the suspects because he's the last person to see her alive. Maybe he made up that story about the kidnapping. Ruins his life in a way because there's always a shadow over him. For 46 years, the detectives in Fort Worth are trying to solve this case. The family doesn't, until just a few weeks ago, get resolution. The mother and father of this poor girl die of old age, never knowing what happened to her, other than she was killed because they found the body. But about 2 months ago, the Fort Worth police gave Othram, our company, a chance to crack this case. And there was some clothing that they found on the body. 46 years they preserved this clothing. And Othram was able to get a little bit of DNA off of her bra that was at the crime scene and where the body was found. And they were able to narrow it down to 3 brothers, one of whom lived in Fort Worth, and in fact lived within a few miles of the family all this time. And the detectives went to this guy's house and got some trash out of his front yard or trash can, and the DNA matched. And so they brought him in, they arrested him, he confessed. And now the people who follow cold cases, the amateur sleuths who are really interested in this kind of thing, you can listen to many podcasts and shows actually, even though this arrest only happened a couple of weeks ago, it's already, become a major story. There are many, it turns out, suspiciously similar murders that happened in the Fort Worth area. This guy was a trucker, so he may have even committed these kinds of crimes far away from Texas, but there were definitely some in that area that might have been him. So they might actually get him to confess to some of these other things. But if you think about the MO, coming up to people who are in a car, using a gun, kidnapping somebody at gunpoint, somebody who does that once, do you think they really only did it once in their life? Or do you think they maybe did it more than once? But anyway, after 46 years, the DNA technology is so powerful that, we were able to identify this guy. And
so,
it's just amazing.
Go ahead. One question I wonder, sorry to interrupt, but is DNA this way that you got this old piece of clothing and you got DNA off it, is it even going to get better and more sensitive as you guys develop more primers and God knows what?
Well, we have very strong, the CEO and my co-founder of this company, David Middleman, he was an academic scientist. He was a professor, I believe, at Virginia Tech in molecular biology before he went off into the private sector. And he and his team are just world-class experts at dealing with messy crime scene samples and yet getting usable DNA that can actually be sequenced. And yes, the techniques just get better and better. And when we get to your kind of cryptozoology interest, you might be interested to know that we have sequenced Neanderthals and other, variants or precursors of humans. So DNA is a very stable molecule. It can survive. If you have the right conditions, it can survive for a long time, not just 46 years, but 46,000 years.
Really? What conditions are those?
Well, you want a cool, dry. So the oldest samples that have been preserved for the Neanderthals and another type of Neanderthal called the Denisovan, typically they've been preserved in a cold, dry climate, like a cave in Siberia, for a very long time, tens of thousands of years. But for crime applications, which is what Occam does, we can go back. I think we've solved the case which went back 100 or 150. I think 150 years. So 46 is not even the record. But the thing I want to say, if you don't mind, just to get this message out to your listeners, if anybody out there is listening and you know people in law enforcement, if you're a cop, you're just trying to do your job. It's just hard enough. There's no reason you would be tracking the latest developments in molecular science or DNA. But if you hear this, if you follow up on the story, you'll find out, I'm telling you the truth, many crimes today could be solved if the police understood what technologies are available to them. And it's, the amount of satisfaction that of all the things I've accomplished in life, I'd say, the solving of this cold case, even though I wasn't really that directly involved in it, although it was my startup that was doing it, I wasn't really on the team that really did the analysis or anything. But the satisfaction from solving this case, getting this guy locked up, bringing resolution to the brother and sister of Carla Walker, I mean, it's just incredible. And it just kills me to see how slowly our society can adapt and properly utilize new technologies. It takes much longer than it should. And so if you're listening to this and you have contacts in law enforcement, or your cousin is a state legislator or governor or mayor, just let them know that, we can accelerate the process. Everybody, anytime a rape is committed, the criminal is leaving their DNA behind. Just think about that. The act of rape involves leaving your DNA behind. And we can catch these guys. We can, typically, if we get the DNA, we will find a cousin match. And it's only a matter of time. I tell these detectives, if you want to solve the case, you can solve the case. How determined are you to solve this case? You care? Because we can find a cousin of the killer. And do you have the footwork to go and interview that person and find out which of their cousins lives in Minneapolis? Because if you care, I think you can solve the case. But that's the situation that we're in.
Do you think at some point that everybody, in the U.S. will have to register their DNA? Think that's ever going to happen?
You're hitting on a really important issue, which is individual privacy rights versus, efficient law enforcement. right? It's that old trade-off. Like if the police could monitor all our phone conversations, they could probably solve crimes also very fast. But you don't necessarily want to give up that information. And so the issue here is who's going to control this genetic information, these DNA databases? Are they going to be searchable by law enforcement? Is it going to require a court order? These are all open questions, and these are all questions that technology is forcing us to think about right now.
Well, can you describe the exact process then that led to the arrest of this guy? Because I'm still confused. So you've got his DNA, but how did you find him?
Yes, very good question. So our lab will take a sample from the police. And as I said, our CEO, David Middleman, he's just an expert he and his team are experts at processing dirty, contaminated DNA and getting clean reads. What we're able to do is there are various places in your genome where you're likely to be different from me or different from Mike. Just people just vary in these certain spots. And when we process the DNA, we're trying to read out, hey, in this position, does the killer have an A or B? Okay, in this next position, does he have an A or a B? In this next position, does he have an A or a B, right? And eventually we get at each of those locations, say there's 1 million locations that we can read out, we get his value of his specific DNA at those 1 million places. And he's the only person on the planet who's like that. Okay? But then we look in the database and we say, like, hey, we compare, the computer is comparing his 1 million variants to every other one that's stored, every other sequence that's stored. And it says, hey, I found 3 that were pretty similar to this guy. And in fact, they're pretty similar. They got about a quarter of the same reads as this guy. Well, maybe that's a cousin, because maybe they just share about a quarter of their DNA because they have a common ancestor.
But
right?
Where did the cousin's DNA come from, Stephen?
Yes, so there are large databases now. People who are interested in genealogy, people who have gotten genotype through Ancestry.com or 23andMe or other commercial vendors, they've uploaded their DNA into these big databases, which people mainly use for genealogy, but now can also be used for law enforcement. And so we have at Othram, so at Othram we both use a public databases, and we also have our proprietary data.
So when you get your DNA tested, that 23andMe, it does go into some type of database that the police can access, correct?
Well, okay, so you're getting really into the nitty-gritty. These are great questions, Doug. So 23andMe will generally have a copy of, unless you tell them to delete it. When they give you back your sequence, your genotype, unless you force them to delete it, they're holding it. Okay. Now, in principle, a court order could force them to allow law enforcement to search their data. At this point, 23andMe and Ancestry are, as far as I understand, vigorously resisting those court orders. So they have not yet been compelled to allow searches. But I think my belief is it's only a matter of time. So at present, if someone is trying to match some DNA, forensic DNA, they generally are using either the public databases in which people have voluntarily uploaded their DNA into these online databases for genealogical purposes. Genealogy is a big activity. People trying to find their ancestry and relatives and roots and things like this. So there are big public databases that are available, and then there are some proprietary ones that we have access to. And so the current situation is that generally we're going to find a cousin match. So we won't find necessarily your mom and dad's DNA in the database, but we'll probably find a cousin. And then we'll, if the police, the detective really wants to solve the case, he's gonna try to make contact with that cousin and figure out who you are.
It's amazing.
That is amazing.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Stephen. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, in the future, it won't be a cousin match. It'll be your brother or your mother or your kid. It'll be a direct relative, but just as more people as the databases get larger, rather than, a slightly more distant relative of yours being easily identifiable, it'll be someone much closer to you, or maybe they'll just have you. and the crime will be solved instantly.
Right. So the person doesn't have to give their DNA. It could be your sister that's given their DNA that could end up leading to a certain criminal.
Yeah. Your cousin's DNA is so much more similar to yours.
Right.
That we immediately see it. We're like, hey, this guy's a cousin of Carla Walker's murderer. Right. So, and then we just, generally people know who their cousins are. So, they can always refuse to talk to the police, but, a lot of cases, really significant cases, maybe you've heard of the Golden State Killer in California. That was the first really prominent case to be cracked. But now it's happening with some regularity. And mostly it's sort of high profile cold cases that you hear about. But literally the next rape that happens in Minneapolis, if the police care and they're aware, they could bring the sample to Othram. Othram could run it. We could say, well, the murderer, the rapist is, they have a cousin living in Fargo. Go talk to her. Maybe you'll figure out who the killer is. The rapist is. So it's very real. It just kills me to think that there are crimes that go unsolved because, the awareness of the technology is not spread yet.
Are you aware of the number of cases that are unsolved? I thought it was it's kind of astronomical. All of the unsolved
astronomical.
murders.
There are every so often a state legislator or somebody will figure out that, there are 100,000, there's a backlog of 100,000 rape kits that have not been tested, that have not been analyzed. Because every rape that happens, if the victim goes to the emergency room, they'll go through this process of collecting forensic evidence and using the rape kit and storing the results. And as I said, the DNA molecule is very stable. So even if that rape kit's as long as it's been stored reasonably well, ideally in a freezer or something, but if it's been stored reasonably well, even years later, we're going to be able to get DNA out of it and potentially find a cousin of the rapist. But there are literally hundreds of thousands of rape kits that have not been processed. So it's just a matter of will, honestly.
What is DNA's biggest enemy? Is it sunlight? Is it
it's
heat?
Generally heat and humidity. Heat and humidity. So heat means there's just more activity in the molecule, so it's easier for it to, other things to bounce off it and degrade it. And I guess, and moisture, I think, also basically brings more potential for degradation.
Okay. That's fascinating.
So,
go ahead, Mike.
I got a question that I wanted to ask from way back when you started the story. Now, from what I've gathered and what I've learned today, you will be able to pick out whether, when you're looking at somebody's DNA for like an embryo, you're going to be able to pick out like how tall they are, their hair, everything else. And even like if they're able to, they're prone to get cancer, any of those type of things.
Yep.
Is there a way, or would there be a way where you might be able to tell or even kind of pick out whether a person is going to be inherently violent or, a sociopath or a psychopath or any of these like mental type issues and whatnot, and then maybe even be able to weed them out?
Yes. So the answer is probably yes. And certain things we already know are highly heritable, like autism, schizophrenia. We even know something about the genetic architectures for those conditions. We even have, for example, pretty good, predictors for schizophrenia. So in other words, if you give me the DNA of somebody, I can tell you whether this person is an outlier, like maybe they have unusually high schizophrenia risk, like maybe they're 10 times more likely to develop schizophrenia later in life than the typical person. So other things like predisposition toward violence, I think probably are also heritable, although, we don't know for sure yet, but we're pretty sure that it seems pretty plausible that would be the case. And so one of the things that will happen down the road is because we want to solve crimes, we will develop over time, not just big generic DNA databases, but DNA databases where the criminals are flagged, the ones that have been locked up or that have been in the system, the criminal justice system. And so the same machine learning that can figure out, how to predict how tall somebody is or predict who's going to have breast cancer, can also predict who's going to be a criminal, who has a tendency toward, criminality. And that is, again, this is a little bit of an extrapolation, but I'm pretty confident that will eventually happen.
And then in the future, they could edit it out with CRISPR, possibly. They're violent.
Yeah. So now you're really getting into it. So the controversial part of this is, imagine that I have some embryos. I'm going through in vitro fertilization, and it's very common now for people to have many more embryos than they are going to use. So it's not uncommon for a couple to have 10 fertilized embryos, and they're going to implant one or two that are actually going to become their children, and the others generally they're going to donate to science. And so how do they select the one, right, which is best for them? But even more than that, Doug, as you were saying, like once CRISPR becomes really, more perfected, the question is going to be like, well, if I see something I don't like really like embryo 4, but I see one thing I don't like, can I just go in and change it, please? That will become a technological reality relatively soon.
And how about people who have already born and grown up and they're violent? I mean, would there be a way to give them a CRISPR shot and this virus goes in and does the splice and gets rid of that identified genome?
It's more speculative because you'd have to really fully understand the genetic architecture for that. But short of that, there are cases already. There are, I think, clinical trials ongoing where, for example, some people have a mutation which predisposes them to macular degeneration. It's a problem that you have in your eye as you get older that causes blindness. And they're already experimenting with, for example, injecting CRISPR into someone's eye to edit just the genes and just the cells in the eye, the DNA in the cells in the eye, and then it removes the problem with macular degeneration. So you can't imagine local CRISPR editing in an adult.
So just really quick, because we've used the word CRISPR a lot, and this is something I think that I heard sporadically throughout the last, couple years or whatever, but not a lot of people know what that is. Could you just really quick go through what CRISPR actually is?
Yeah, it's a new development. It's only a few years old, and it's something we took actually from bacteria, that bacteria have a mechanism so that when they get invaded by, say, a virus or something, that they have a way of dealing with it by editing their own DNA, cutting out a piece of their DNA and replacing it. And in a way, the only thing the layperson really needs to know about it is that it's just like what science fiction novelists thought about when they talked about genetic engineering, like some mechanism by which you could just make specific changes to the DNA in a cell by just injecting the cell with something. The details are very complicated. It's not even really my area of expertise, but the point is we've made just enormous progress in the last few years in the ability to make specific edits that we want without accidentally making edits that we don't want. So we're just approaching that, what the science fiction writer had always conceived of as a possibility, which is that we would someday have like kind of total control over our DNA.
Excellent. So I'd like to, because I think with the 45 minutes left, it's probably going to take that entire time. But I'd like to get into more my world and my specialty, and that is like the paranormal and kind of the stuff that, the cryptozoology and stuff like that. But do you think that as like a theoretical physicist, do you look into like mysteries like ghosts, remote viewing, psychic abilities? Like, how do you factor those into DNA? Like, I know a lot of people consider schizophrenia to match what, we in this field would call like a demonic possession. How is it that you could use DNA and how do you look at like these special abilities that people have?
Well, I've been interested in this kind of thing, like UFOs or psychic capabilities, all that stuff, since I was a kid. So I'm not uninterested in it. I'm very interested in it. However, as a physicist, I would say the evidence for some of this paranormal activity is fairly weak. So in other words, we don't know of, our physical laws don't allow for a lot of these things. We don't have an explanation for how these things would work in terms of ordinary physics. Aliens and UFOs is a different story. Okay, so that is a separate issue. So whether or not there are other intelligent species in the universe and whether they've visited Earth, that's a whole separate issue. And actually, the science is going the other way on that, where it's becoming more and more plausible because we're discovering more and more Earth-like planets or planets that are favorable for life in the galaxy and even beyond. So the question of extraterrestrial stuff, that is becoming, I think, more and more plausible in my lifetime as we discover more things scientifically. Some of the other things you mentioned, I think I'd have to say the evidence, as far as I know, is not particularly strong for them.
So is DNA universal, Stephen? Is DNA going to be the same on another planet? Do you think it's a building block of the universe?
It's a great question, Doug. So we don't know. There are actually scientists who think about what other systems for storing and transmitting information biologically, from one generation to the next, which would allow, what that's necessary for evolution and things like that to occur. We don't know whether there's another molecule that could have similar properties to DNA that could be used similarly, say, by some alien species. So it's really an open question.
So DNA, you must kind of believe it's a fairly perfect system, that it could be used in other planets, correct?
Yeah, again, this is I think an honest scientist has to say there's just a lot that we don't know. And so one issue is how, of all the, given the atoms and chemical bonds that are possible in our universe, how many other ways are there to accomplish the things that DNA does, which is to transmit information from, generation to generation or hold it within each cell, cause a cell to function the right way. It may be that DNA is very unique, and of all the different kinds of molecules, almost uncountable set of possible molecules in the universe, only DNA does the trick. Other people would say, no, there's no way that's the case. There are probably lots of other molecular arrangements, that have special properties like this. And we just literally don't know the answer. We might not know until we meet some alien species that uses some other system other than DNA.
It makes me wonder if any genomic scientists have ever gone over to a home where somebody claims they're being abducted and swabbed everything for some type of weird DNA. You just wonder.
Well, the thing is that because we're focused on DNA, because we know what it does in our biology, we're focused on looking at it and reading it out, etc. If there were some other, like say some aliens had visited your house and they left behind their equivalent of DNA, we might not notice it because to us it would just be some random weird molecule that's around.
Yeah,
but we're not. We haven't built tools to really look. We haven't built specific tools to really specifically look at that molecule.
So let's talk about unknown DNA you've never seen. Isn't that, because, I've, for certain TV shows I've produced, I've had DNA samples tested on hairs and other things, and they always come back human, but yet, we're not getting a very big sequence, or they're coming back unknown. Well, what does unknown mean? It just means it's
I seem to recall, again, this is not my specialty, but I seem to recall studies where they just took, like a liter of seawater and they, tried to sequence all the DNA fragments they found in there. And
Yep.
There are many species that, we're just not familiar with, like, even of just bacteria or stuff in the water, which has its own DNA or RNA. And so, of course, yes, there would be lots of kinds of unknown DNA that's not so well. We can tell it's DNA, but it's not characterized well enough that we happen to know what species it belongs to.
And of course, you're talking about environmental DNA.
Well, like in that liter of seawater, there's actually a lot of living stuff.
Right. Well, eDNA has been, sorry, Michael.
It's all right.
eDNA is something new that, I keep hearing about. I haven't been involved in it, but yeah, they did a study in Loch Ness, where they took water samples all around the lake and they're looking for evidence of the Loch Ness monster. But I'm thinking, how are they going to identify something that they have no idea what it is? They don't know what they're looking for.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. And the modern sequencing techniques involve what's called shotgun reconstruction. So it basically cuts the DNA into little fragments and then pieces it back together. There are technical reasons why that's the the most effective way to do things. And if you know what you're looking for, like someone tells you ahead of time, hey, this is some human DNA, then the reassembly, is designed to work. If it turns out it's not human DNA, it was actually from a kumquat or something, or banana, and you're trying to assemble it thinking it's human DNA, and you're running software on it that's optimized for human DNA, you might just get garbage. So, there's a lot of complexity in here, I guess I'm just trying to say.
Yeah. Well, of all the crypto creatures, like Bigfoot would be the one that I would kind of lean towards as being the most obvious one. If it's going to ever be proven, it would be that one, because there's just so many sightings that happen week after week after day.
If you take two humans, okay, just you and Mike, say, and I look at your DNA, okay, say I look at a particular region of DNA, and I compare you to Mike, you're going to be very similar to each other. Only at about 1 in 1,000 base pairs will you differ. Okay, so there's almost no difference. Like 999 out of 1,000 base pairs, you guys will be the same, and then there'll be a little variant. And the variant makes those variants scattered throughout your genome make all the difference. That's why maybe you're shorter than Mike, and Mike wears glasses and you don't. All those things are related to those differences, but the differences are fairly sparse. Now, if I compare you to a monkey, like a chimpanzee, you'll differ from the chimpanzee at about 1 or 2 per 100. Instead of 1 per 1,000, 1 or 2 per 100 places in the DNA, you'll differ from the monkey. And in Neanderthal, you'll differ at a few per 1,000. So a few times as many differences as between you and Mike. You'll have a few times more differences out of 1,000 if I compare you to a Neanderthal. So anything that looks a lot like human DNA, but it has just more differences, is probably something like a Neanderthal. It's somewhere between a human and a monkey. So that case wouldn't be as hard as the Loch Ness case. We would sequence it as if it were a human, and we would just find, like, this is no human we've ever seen before, because it's got too much variation that, it's more different from us than any human that we know of, but it's more similar to us than a monkey, than a gorilla.
But if we got you enough preserved DNA, wouldn't you be able to zero in on height? Go, oh my God, okay, it's 7'8". So now it's going to separate it. It's going to, it's going to give you some new information that's going to separate it from humans.
Well, it's possible that the height predictor might still work, even though it's it's not an actual human, but it's also possible there are additional variants in its genome that are influencing its height that are not ones that we have as humans. And so the predictor would not, call those effects properly. But the point I'm trying to make, Doug, is that if you get DNA from some creature that is fairly close to a human, like instead of 1 per 1,000 variation from a human, it has a few per 1,000 or 10 per 1,000, we would know immediately that is some very human-like thing, but is definitely not a human. That would be very easy to tell from the DNA.
I mean, what would you look at? I mean, this thing is supposedly human, but it's covered in hair. It's bigger than the average human, more muscle than the average human. But really, what if those are the only differences, except where it lives? Do you following me? So if I walked up to a Bigfoot and could grab some hair follicles, with fat tissue and skin cells, handed them to you, and I knew they came from a Bigfoot, what would you be looking for as a scientist?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to explain to you is if it really is basically just a human, then maybe its DNA would not jump out at us. But from what you're telling me about it, it would be more different from you than Mike is, or than I am, or than Shaquille O'Neal is. So it would stand out. Like we would say, this is the most divergent near human DNA we've ever seen. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I do. I mean, wouldn't that raise the bar? Wouldn't that raise the bar on the creature's existence if it came out and your height predicted at 8 foot?
If you found some DNA that, when sequenced, was very close to human, but definitely not human, no human has that much difference in actual base pairs from, say, Mike, that would be a huge sensation. That would be, people would say, like, what is that? Is that some Neanderthal-like DNA he got, or what? But it doesn't look like a Neanderthal because we have the Neanderthal sequences. So obviously, if this thing is real and you could get DNA from it, it would be huge. You wouldn't necessarily need anything other than just the DNA itself.
And how many million base pairs would you have to get? Sorry, Mike, I did it again to you.
No, that's right. It's all right. Because you were actually pretty much just asking the exact same question I was. Just much more scientific. Because my question was just, how much DNA would you actually need in order to make these genomic predictions and whatnot on the kind of species or what they normally look like?
Well, it's not easy for us to figure out the phenotype or what the species would look like. In other words, the DNA itself is a chain of amino acids. So we're just reading out, what does it have at position 1? What does it have at position 2? What does it have at position 3? The effect of those differences between them and a human, what it actually makes the organism, how it makes the organism different, we don't know. We haven't really fully solved the decoding of DNA to the point where we could do that. But I'm just saying, if you just count the number of differences, if it's a frog, it has many, many more differences. Or if it's a chimpanzee, it has many, many more differences than a near human would have. So if you just find something that's in an intermediate zone, like a Neanderthal, but it's not a Neanderthal, you'd be done. You'd already have made scientific history. But we wouldn't necessarily be able to say, this thing has big green eyes, because its DNA might be sufficiently different that our predictions are off.
Could you determine from a sample like that what diseases it's prone to or resistant to? I mean, could that also be an interesting factor? We go, oh my God, it's not susceptible to any cancers or whatever. You know what I mean? No, I mean, we're not advanced enough to be able to do that, to just look at the blueprint and figure out exactly what the features of the organism are. But, again, if you just brought a bone, there are whole scientific labs that specialize in paleo DNA, like ancient human DNA or Neanderthal DNA and trying to get Homo erectus DNA. If you just brought them your sample, they're experts at this because they're recovering the DNA from deep. They're drilling into, teeth and bones that have been found in Siberia and stuff like this. And if they were to genotype it of, say, some Bigfoot or something and find, hey, this is a cousin of us. It's definitely not a human. They could tell that right away. And they could say, but it's not a Neanderthal sequence because we know what those look like. And it's not a Denisovan sequence.
It's not that. It's not Homo erectus. You would make scientific history overnight.
Yeah, and of course, I think the barrier to all of this is we've got a bunch of amateur researchers. They don't have, they can't supply 5 samples and go, here's $25,000. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
exactly. They don't even have wherewithal to even identify for instance, if it's a hair, they're not even sure if it's a Bigfoot hair because they've collected it, in relationship to a sighting, but they're not really sure. And so you can see the barriers that are up against researchers.
Well, the people, for example, like if you look at the story of how Neanderthal DNA was recovered and genotyped, it was a decades-long effort by, big groups of scientists, trying to collect the fossils, trying to get useful DNA out of the bones, and then figuring out the right way to genotype it. It took a lot of ingenuity, and it was a very big research program. So you really need that level of resources to solve your problem. But it would start with convincing, the National Science Foundation, or, for example, in Germany, there's a big set of government-funded laboratories called the Max Planck Institutes. And one of the leading researchers who does Neanderthal work is at Max Planck Institute, and he has, an enormous budget to pursue this and has made huge breakthroughs. So, you would need that level of resources, I think, to
Actually, I went to them once on a project where I actually got one of the Gigantopithecus teeth, brought it to the Max Planck Institute to drill into it to get DNA. They didn't recover any.
It said that he left. It said that Steve left. Our call got cut off with him.
Well, we're going to have to call him back.
I agree. So everybody is just going to have to be patient with me while I do this. But, yeah, it's interesting stuff, that's for sure. Oh, here we go. Steve, welcome back.
Hey, sorry about that. For modern mobile technology.
You must have AT&T.
No, T-Mobile, but...
Oh, well, damn. Because that would have been really funny if I could have guessed that it was AT&T, but that's okay. So, Doug, why don't you ask your question again?
Yeah, it was just, I was mentioning I did use the Max Planck, but this goes back probably about 11 years ago. And they drilled into a gigantotooth, and you would think there would be some DNA in the interior, of the tooth. They didn't get any.
Yeah. So how many years ago was this?
11.
Yeah, so 11 years ago, they were still perfecting these techniques. Now they would be much better at this.
Yeah, and that's kind of the issue. I'm always, they've got some other samples I've hung on to. I've got a couple of the Freeman hairs from the Freeman footage. And I just keep waiting and waiting, for the technology to get better so I don't waste them. Because no doubt you would have to destroy the evidence, correct?
Correct. You consume it.
Yep. So that's the problem. We didn't get DNA. Oh, well, I should have waited. So I've got a question. Okay. So if they ever collect DNA from Mars and get it back to us, what lab is going to get that sample? Who's it going to go to?
Well, could be the U.S. government, could be the Chinese government. Who knows? Whoever gets there first.
Yeah.
But
would it be possible they would select one of your labs?
Sure, possibly. I mean, I think it would be, obviously, it's an extremely important, research project if they manage to land a probe on Venus or on Mars and get some DNA or something like DNA to analyze. I don't think there'll be a shortage of scientists that are interested in working on it.
Yeah, well, hopefully. I mean, that's obviously going to be, hopefully in our lifetimes, something like that is going to happen. It's going to be very, extremely exciting.
It's very possible that life on Earth, for example, originated on Mars because, the situation, the environment was quite different on Mars long ago, and maybe life actually first evolved there. And it's been shown that you can transport DNA, or at least molecules, from, outer planets to inner planets. If you have some meteor or something that impacts, Mars, it can shoot things up far enough that they actually go out into space and they can come all the way to Earth. So, life could potentially have spread within our solar system.
Well, I would think they would use like an eDNA technique where they would just somehow a probe would go in and scoop a bunch of soil in a likely place, and it would just blast off and come back to Earth. How come they haven't done that? I wonder that. It seems so simple.
They have done well. I mean, getting stuff back is no mean feat. And the other issue is, there's no guarantee that in that particular spot you're going to find what you want.
Yeah.
Right. Mars has not been a particularly hospitable, I think, planet for at least our kind of life for a while. So who knows?
Can you clone from like partial DNA samples, or do you need like the full thing?
No, if you have fragments, I mean, you're going to the sequencing techniques that people use now involve fragmenting the DNA anyway, so you could deal with fragments.
So if you brought like a fragment of, let's say you get a partial DNA of what Doug would consider a Bigfoot or even an alien or something along those lines, would you be able to then clone a Bigfoot if that is indeed what it is?
Well, first of all, if you wanted to clone an organism, you'd want its entire genetic sequence. So you'd want a full sequence of its DNA. And then secondly, cloning, I mean, you would need to be able to synthetically produce a replica of its DNA and then insert it into some host cell, like that would develop into the organism. So, as you remember in Jurassic Park, what did they use? Frogs or toads? They used frogs or something. So they knew this is science fiction, of course. They knew the DNA sequence for the dinosaur, and then they could synthetically edit maybe the frog DNA, or I forgot what it was, some living organism today to be the dinosaur DNA, but then they would have to implant it in a mother and grow the baby dinosaur or whatever inside unless they had an artificial womb. I don't remember if they had that technology in the science fiction, but you need all that stuff if you're going to clone random species based just on their DNA sequence. Of course, in the future, we might someday actually do it with Neanderthals, right? You could edit a human embryo to be a Neanderthal potentially, and then implant it in a human mother and deliver it that way.
So one of the things that I saw in the documentary today was one guy used the phrase that they had turned science fiction into science fact. So in your opinion, like, what do you think right now we would consider science fiction that you see down the road kind of being science fact?
Well, all of these things we've been talking about, in the minds of most people who aren't following the frontier very carefully, are science fiction. If you go to a cop, detective, and you say, "Hey, sir, if you run that rape kit, or you just give me that little spatter of blood that you got from the crime scene, I will identify for you a cousin of the killer, and then you just need to talk to them to find the killer," they would say, "Hey, you're pulling my leg. That's science fiction." If I went to some random person, I said, when you grow up, young lady, and you want to have your kids, you should use in vitro fertilization and produce 20 embryos, and then we can screen against diseases to make sure that, let's say you have breast cancer that runs in your family, we can make sure that you don't pass on that high risk to your kids. That girl would probably say, "That's science fiction. What are you talking about? It's not possible." So these are things that are possible now, but they're really at the frontier, and only small numbers of people are really aware of it. Now, forecasting a little bit further forward, as you know, there was this Chinese scientist, He Jiankui, who actually did use CRISPR gene editing on some embryos in China, and those embryos were born little girls. CRISPR is going to get better and better, and so I think eventually, probably there are going to be gene-edited babies born. I would be surprised if I got in a time machine and I came back 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now if there weren't gene-edited babies that had been born. I mean, because we can certainly do it. It's been done, but people are, quite skittish about it, and it's not clear that technology is really ready for safe use, et cetera, and there are a lot of ethical issues that need to be worked out. But these are things which are really classic science fiction ideas that are now becoming reality.
Stephen, I've got a question. I'm just curious, kind of a Doug question, but is there possibly, like atomic particles, some type of sub-DNA, some type of other little particles that haven't been discovered yet that make up, the double helix?
Not that we know of. I mean, I think that the individual DNA molecules have been imaged so aggressively that it's hard to believe that there are some additional atoms or things attached to it that we haven't detected. But, it's not impossible.
But in your world, doesn't small go on forever?
It's possible, but there would have to be some reason why that small thing, which isn't anything that we're aware of existing yet, hasn't been seen in, say, our particle accelerators where we try to produce, more fundamental particles, and also manages to attach in some meaningful way to a DNA molecule. I mean, a lot is known about, let's just put it this way, a lot is known about subatomic physics. So the degrees of freedom that are available for what you're hypothesizing are pretty constrained.
Okay, I had to ask.
Sure.
I don't want to say are you worried, because maybe that's not the best one, but do you think that there's DNA research, kind of, what you are doing that is being done in secret by like foreign governments? Like I saw the speech by Vladimir Putin of Russia, talking about how, you might even be able to use CRISPR to, make soldiers that can feel pain, that sort of thing. Yep. I mean, are you worried that like you and your fellow scientists' research and breakthroughs and whatnot would then be in turn used by governments to do something like that?
I think that there's a good chance that governments will eventually use some of this technology for national security purposes. Let's just say that I keep abreast of what my colleagues in these other countries are doing, and our intelligence services are interested in these questions.
Have you ever been approached by that you can tell us by any of our government people wanting you to like work on because I know you said that when you first started you worked kind of with the CIA in doing some things. I mean, has that happened lately?
Let's just say that our intelligence services and national security agencies they're interested in this particular area, and they try to keep abreast of it, and they do that by talking to the actual scientists.
So stop asking. Sorry, I had to ask.
That was a mic question. You got one?
That's a mic question.
You just got a mic question.
Totally fair question. I mean, you as a taxpayer, you should be outraged if our government is not keeping pace with, technologies that might have applications in that area.
Are we ever going to see a mammoth? I keep hearing about they're going to clone the mammoth. I've been hearing about that for, 20 years now?
Been a long time, yeah.
What they need first is they need DNA from a mammoth, which I don't believe they have yet. So they don't have a mammoth sequence.
I thought they found all sorts of frozen carcasses up in Siberia. And
yes, but I don't believe they've managed to recover to actually sequence the DNA of a mammoth.
Really?
That's step one.
Well, there you go. Step one. All you need is one.
And then step two is you need CRISPR or the editing technology to be good enough that you can take the nearest relative, like say an elephant, and edit the DNA of an embryo of an elephant so that it is effectively a mammoth. You need to be able to do that editing or some kind of synthetic construction of the DNA. And we're not able to do that yet.
How long does DNA actually last? I mean, can it, if it's encased in ice and completely frozen, can it last for centuries?
Yeah, well, as I said, the Neanderthal DNA that's been successfully recovered is, I don't know the exact age, but it's probably at least 30 or 50,000 years old.
Nice.
But that's not millions of years. I mean, for some species that you're interested in, you may need to go back millions of years.
Not saying that they should actually do it because you brought up Jurassic Park, but do you think that we would ever be able to get a sample of dinosaur DNA?
Yeah, that depends on factors that, I don't know. It's somewhat speculative, but I wouldn't be that surprised if someday we managed to get some dinosaur DNA. I think less speculatively, as I was saying, we already have Neanderthal DNA. So with some improved CRISPR technology, we could probably create Neanderthal babies by editing human embryos. Now, obviously, ethically, there are all kinds of questions about whether that should be done, but I think I would be, I would predict that we will have that technical capability, perhaps by the end of my lifetime.
I guess that then brings up the question. I don't know if you like this question or not, but do you ever get, I don't want to say approached or anything, but does anybody ever ask you about the ethics of what you're doing?
Oh, all the time. We, and that's as it should be. I mean, the reason that I agree, if a journalist wants to interview me and talk about this general area, I always say yes, even though I sometimes know ahead of time that journalist is going to smear me or say, negative things about the research. But I feel it's our responsibility because there are very big questions that human civilization, human society is going to have to make actual decisions on, like how much genetic screening are we going to allow? I mean, that's a technology we have right now, and there need to be decisions on what should be allowed. Should you be allowed to screen for IQ? Should be allowed to screen for cosmetic traits? What edits should you be allowed to make? These are all huge questions that are going to actually, we're at an inflection point in human evolution where we now are starting to get molecular control over our own evolution as a species. And society needs to decide what, are we going to restrict all this stuff? We don't want it. It's unethical. It's terrible. It's too dangerous. Or, no, this is great. Maybe humans can live 200 years and be disease-free if we take advantage of all these technologies. But there has to be an informed public debate about this topic. And that's why I always agree to these interviews, because this technology is being developed by super smart people working night and day, and it's running away from what the average person or even the average senator can understand.
If you could pick one or a couple, kind of specific things that you think the public ought to know about what you do, or maybe some of the things that they get told that are often misconstrued or wrong about what they get told.
Well, I'll just make some general statements that I wish everybody understood. So almost all human traits, whether it's how smart you are or how tall you are, or whether you're likely to get diabetes, all those characteristics are at least partially heritable. So they're not fully under genetic control. The environment matters, what you eat matters, whether you exercise. But genes do have an influence on all those things. And we're starting to get a handle on it. We're starting to be able to, from a DNA sample, tell you something about the person. And the applications of this kind of thing, as I was just saying, will cause potentially an inflection in human evolution. And people need to understand this, and there has to be an intelligent discussion of it, and society needs to decide, like, okay, we want to allow this or we don't want to allow this. Because I can tell you right now, our company, when we deal with IVF clinics, for example, in Asia, not just in Asia, but even in the United States, there are a lot of IVF doctors and clinics that want to be very aggressive about this, that want to allow the parents to screen for IQ, for example. In Asia, the IVF clinics view their job as to help the parents get the best healthiest child that they can. They view that as their responsibility. And so they want to use the technology aggressively. In the U.S. or in Europe, people are a little more conservative about the ethical situation. But not all clinics are like that. So, we're at a decision point now. And so, I think people need to be aware of that.
I would imagine you've seen the show Ancient Aliens, Stephen?
I saw Chariots of the Gods when I was a kid. I was a big fan of, what's his name? Von Daniken? Was that his name?
Yes.
Yeah.
But, their theory basically is that we've been visited, forever, thousands of years, not millions of years, and they've been basically performing CRISPR on humans. Started with, God knows, early humans, and it's been something they've been manipulating us. And from what you're telling me, that's all possible, correct?
It's all possible. It's all possible in the sense that, there's a very famous physicist named Enrico Fermi, and he was the first to articulate what's called the Fermi paradox, which is that given that there's so many stars in the galaxy and so many habitable worlds, we now know, why have we not been visited by any aliens? If you just do a calculation like, it took us X thousands of years to develop the technology to visit the moon or Mars, and if you just extrapolate a little bit, it's not implausible that, the galaxies, we're talking about things which are billions of years old. So there's been a lot of time for earlier civilizations to have evolved and flourished and explored. Why have we not been visited? And it's actually a paradox. It's considered a difficult question to answer. Like, why is that the case, given the age, given how old our galaxy is? So, one hypothesis is that they do know they have visited us, but maybe since we're so primitive and still developing, they've kind of just carved out we're like in a protected zone, a wildlife zone or something, and they're just not, they're concealing themselves from us, and maybe they're quite beneficent. Who knows? Nobody knows the answer to this question. If someone just tells you, there's, like when I was growing up, people would say, there's no life on other planets. That's just science fiction. But now no serious astrophysicist or astronomer would say that to you because they know of Earth-like planets that we've now detected. Planets that have the right temperature and oxygen and water and things like that could host life like ours. So to say for sure that we're alone in this galaxy is a very strong hypothesis, and most people probably wouldn't accept it. So then the question is,
Stephen, all of the just jillions of animals that we have, 1.8 million species, and so many of them are so beautiful and so diverse, underwater, above water. Is there any way to reverse engineer some of these animals and go, man, there's no way this could have happened by accident?
Well, you're actually flirting, Doug, with ideas from creationism, because some creationists will say Yeah, I understand about Darwin and natural selection and mutations and all this stuff, but I just can't believe that natural selection could have produced the dolphin and the spider, and all these things, the human eye, human brain. They just don't believe it. And on the other side, the people who study evolution will say, no, this is a random chance causes little changes in the DNA, and if the change is advantageous, then that creature reproduces, and you get creatures spreading out and filling every ecological niche, and they become very optimized for their ecological niches. And although it seems impossible that something that complex could have evolved through random chance, it is actually how it works, and the fossil record tells us that.
Yeah.
So
it just seems so amazing. I mean, you watch a nature documentary, and every time you do, I think probably everybody who's watching going, oh my God, I didn't know that animal exists, and look at the crazy things it does and the way it looks.
Yeah.
But
the one thing that constrains all these creatures is the laws of physics. As far as we know, none of them are violating the laws of physics.
No, but you do wonder if there's been manipulation.
Sure, and like in classic science fiction, you've probably seen 2001, for example.
Yes.
Like the movie opens with this monolith appearing in front of some, like Neanderthal, like ape men or whatever, and it like changes them and makes them more intelligent, right? And so who knows? Maybe there was some interference in our evolution. Maybe the amount of time required to produce, like, say, something as good as the human brain is actually much larger than we think, and we only got to where we are relatively quickly because some aliens intervened. Who knows?
Well, my question would be, do you think in the future there'd be a way to reverse engineer to see if there has been some gene splicing?
Yeah. So one of the things that evolutionary theorists look at is the rate of change, like how fast can organisms change. And, it is possible they could, once they understand things really well, say, hey, wait a minute, something's fishy here. Something sped up our evolution. We can't account for how fast certain things evolved.
Well, we've heard about the missing link forever, the missing link.
Right.
Have we discovered the missing link yet?
Well, I think that, there are gaps in the whole tree of, hominid evolution, right? But I think the picture overall of, like, starting with some very small ape-like things, which gradually, started walking erect and got bigger and bigger brains and stuff, it does seem like that's how it happened. Now, whether there was any intervention, who knows? But it would be hard to detect that, obviously.
So we only have like a minute and a half left. So with the time left, let's say there are police officers or whatnot that do have rape kits, and they do have DNA that from cold cases or whatever that they would like your company to take a look, or if anybody maybe just has a question, something that we didn't cover tonight. How would somebody get a hold of you? How would somebody get DNA to you? All that good stuff.
Well, if you just Google my name, you'll find my blog, for example. You can get in touch with me. I'm on Twitter. So my name is Steve, Steve, and the last name is HSU. H as in hat, S as in Sam, U as in up. So I'm pretty easy to find on the internet. If you're a detective or police officer and there's a case that you want to solve, we have a site called DNA Solves, all one word, DNAsolves.com. And we will even crowdfund. If your department cannot raise the, say, $5,000 that it costs for us to run the DNA for you, we will help you. We'll put up a Patreon or other fundraising mechanism. If you'll give us the facts about your case, the victim, the family, something that makes people care, we'll put that up there and try to help you raise the money to solve the case, because we want to solve these cases. It's so important. It's such a wonderful feeling to be able to help some family get closure, or to get some terrible person locked up and save other people from being victims. So just go to DNAsolves.com, and we want to work with you.
Criminals need to be on high alert.
Yes. Well, once criminals, if a rapist realizes that the very act of rape and leaving the DNA behind is likely to get them caught, within a matter of weeks they'll be caught. Some of them might curtail their activities, and others will be caught and locked up, and they'll just be off the streets.
Absolutely. Well, that does it for us tonight. Steve, thank you for coming on. This has been amazing for me, especially because I don't usually get this kind of access to people such as yourselves. So thank you very much for sharing all this stuff tonight.
Thank you, Stephen.
My pleasure.
Doug, always
Have
a pleasure. That does it for us.
Good night,
Joel will
Michael.
be back next week, and we'll see y'all then. Till next time, we'll talk to you later. Have a great week.
Bye, guys.
Me, but also you. The Pharaoh fast forwards his favorite foreign film, Powder Donut. Okay, what's my line?
The only line I see here on the script is get options based on your budget with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive.
Oh man, that's a tongue twister, huh? I'm sorry, I'm gonna need a few more minutes. Bulbous Walrus, the Bulbous Walrus.
The Name Your Price tool, only from Progressive.
The owl ran afoul of the comatose coxswain.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.